You're listening to Silver to Bronze, a Marvel Comics podcast where we explore Marvel's greatest eras, the Silver and Bronze Ages. I'm Tony, and here with me is my co-host Scott.
Hello, nice to be here.
Yeah, right. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the name of the podcast, really, the Silver and Bronze Ages of comics, and specifically Marvel Comics. I think you and I, we would agree that that's our two favorite ages.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And matter of fact, I don't really know much about any of the other eras.
Same.
When did you start collecting?
Well, it probably wasn't called collecting back then.
Yeah,
but
I didn't
even
think
when
it was collecting, yeah.
when I was a kid in elementary school, when I got my allowance, virtually all of it was always spent on comic books, and I was buying them, reading them, and tucking them away for rereading later. But at that time, I wouldn't have known. I didn't collect anything. I just bought comic books and read them. And that went through until I was a youngster, probably in my early 20s. And I kind of got out of collecting because I had interests in other things, and I let my accumulated stash of comics go. But then in later years, I kind of got my interest rekindled, but I also had a job and a means to move around on my own. And I started thinking to myself, boy, I remember some of those stories and I'd love to reread those. And so I would go to the comic store and grab a handful of comics and reread them. And it just, from there, it really snowballed and I became what you would call a serious collector, buying lots and lots of back issues, keeping up with what was new. So I kind of have almost two perspectives that I can draw on. One is being a kid growing up, reading these comic books instead of doing my homework and that sort of thing. And then later as a collector, looking for key issues, understanding the difference in values and grades and conditions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I can't even relate to that. I collected as a child, as a teenager actually, and then I abruptly quit when I went to college. It was that blunt. But I've kept all mine. I have all of them except for the ones I just can't seem to locate, but they're somewhere. What's your situation? How many did you sell them twice, or did you just sell them the one time?
I accumulated two different collections, which were liquidated twice.
Okay.
But many years apart from each other.
Right. So, well, if you wanted to kind of like, I don't know what people think what their definition of the Silver Age is and the Bronze Age, but do you want to just jump into what we kind of consider to be the Silver Age?
Sure.
Like, what's your definition of the Silver Age?
For me, in my mind, even though I know that historically it probably began a little bit earlier, but for me, it's Fantastic Four #1.
Right.
And really only mostly because I've only read mainly Marvel comics through my life. So my history of what the comic industry was like is always focused through Marvel.
Yeah. My understanding is the Silver Age would have started in 54, something like that. And I think that has to do with the Comic Code Authority. But for us, it's 1961, like the later part of that year. Yeah.
Well, Marvel, I mean, after DC rebooted The Flash,
right,
in Showcase Comics, suddenly superheroes skyrocketed in popularity. And Marvel at the time, if I recall, was mainly doing monsters and sci-fi stories and that sort of thing. And romance comics, maybe even a few Westerns in there. And they said, hey, the superheroes are taking off. We need to jump on it. And Fantastic Four #1 was the start of all that.
Right. Trying to mimic the Justice League, I think, or at least to play off of the team aspect. Yeah. There's so much you cannot talk about that age without just chatting a lot about that issue #1 and how it came to be. Like you had Stan Lee, I guess you would say, writing, and then you had Jack Kirby, which if people don't know who Jack Kirby is, they're in for a treat, right? Because he's such a fun artist. Yeah, just the what they came up with is really no less than amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, well, maybe people would want to know, like, what's the difference between the Fantastic Four and what DC was doing at the time? Like, why was that so incredible?
I think a lot of it had to do with the characterization of the characters in the comics. Um, I think what Stan wanted to do was create characters that were a bit more relatable. Uh, these weren't characters that were born with their powers. They weren't, bestowed upon them by the gods or whatever. They were a family, and through an absolute accident, became transformed into these beings. And they at first weren't all that sure that's exactly what they wanted to be. So that they have a kind of a doubt and second guessing of themselves. They quibble amongst themselves, which is very relatable to just normal people.
Yeah, certainly in my household, when I was a kid. Yeah, and you know what? They set the pace, like they defined, in my opinion, what really is part of that characterization of the Silver Age. Like, yes, that relatability, that was huge. It was in New York City, or there's a real place. All these characters live in a real place. It's not Gotham City. What was the other big one?
Metropolis.
Metropolis, thank you. And what else was I thinking that they did? Oh, just that they were imperfect,
Yes.
and all the characters were imperfect.
Yeah.
As opposed to traditional, they just were not traditional superheroes at all.
I think Stan coined the phrase "heroes with hang-ups."
Yeah, there you go. Absolute matter of fact, almost to an annoying level sometimes. Like as Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm are just constantly going at each other, and Ben Grimm struggles like no one else. The other three, they're actually kind of happy with their powers. Ben Grimm, for instance, isn't
Right.
at all, and the team is actually working to help him become normal again, I guess you could say. And it's an ongoing story.
Yeah, looking for a cure
yeah.
to his condition.
Yeah, it goes. That story comes back again and again and again. It seems
it does.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not my imagination.
No, it was kind of a cyclical trope that came around on numerous different occasions.
Oh, another. Just I would like to come back to the Fantastic Four if you want, issue number 1, and just keep on going. But just to kind of change pace a little bit, like you had 2 of the 3 major creators of that time that I think defined the Silver Age. I'm sure you could add a 4th or 5th, but to me it would be Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, the artist, and then actually a writer as well, and Steve Ditko.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, is there anyone else we'd want to add to that list?
Initially, I think of those 3.
Yeah.
But hot on their heels, I would go so far as to probably include Gene Colan as an artist.
Okay.
Because I tend to think of him on
I do not know who that is.
He did all the earliest Iron Man
Okay.
and Captain America comics when they were a 2-for-1 in, I believe it was it Tales of Suspense?
Yeah. I think you're right.
And of course, I still consider it very much Silver Age, but a little later on, of course, John Romita came onto the scene.
That's what was coming to my mind. Like, I didn't know when he came on the scene.
I'm not sure either. I know that he took over for Steve Ditko when he left Spider-Man, and that was in the early, around the 30s, probably, issues in the 30s or early 40s.
But all those artists, it's my understanding, I don't know how true this is, that they were very much like, you need to copy what Kirby's doing.
Yeah.
Is that
Kirby was the template?
Yeah, and that's why. But then Steve Ditko not.
And he stands apart as being the one that didn't quite follow that mold.
That's why I feel confident saying these are the 3 that just really set the stage for everything for decades. It's just kind of crazy. Like, I mean, I'm not really up to present day comics at all, but I've listened to a few interviews here and there of artists. I have no idea who they are and what they're doing. I'm kind of looking forward to figuring it out one day, but they still reference these guys, and just so the young artists today are still going all the way back to the 60s to get their inspiration.
I would almost go so far as to say that there's been a little bit of a resurgence,
really,
in that in the the homages to Jack Kirby and his style, especially in some of the current animated shows. Marvel, the animated shows are taking a lot of nods from the way Jack Kirby portrayed things.
Good.
It makes, and people come, they people new to the concept watch it and say how unique and how groundbreaking it is. But honestly, it's a style that was, forged in the early 60s.
And for people that don't know Kirby's art, like what do you think is so great about it? What you just said made me think about that. Like, how would you describe it?
There are two things that always leap to mind for me when I think of Kirby. And one is the absolute dynamic use of figures. When you think of dynamic poses, when you think of forced perspective, almost impossible anatomical movements, but it conveys such a sense of energy and action.
Absolutely.
That the characters literally look like they're leaping out of the panel. And the other thing I think about, and of course I'm sure a lot of other people are too, the nearly psychedelic use of color and backgrounds. I mean, when you think of when I say the negative zone,
exactly,
what immediately comes to mind.
I love the negative zone.
And it's the weird mishmash of colors and objects, to the point of even taking things like, photographs of moon craters and that sort of thing and throwing color washes over it and just truly creating something that is out of this world, at the risk of oversimplifying.
And you know what? They are pieces of art, are they not? Like when you get that full page spread sometimes, it can happen in a single panel as well, but he would just do these scenes that were, the story could really not be all that great, but man, the visual would be awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that about there's a series that he did called The Eternals. And this would be in the Bronze Age. This was after 1970, I think. But actually, I don't know if I really care for the story that much, but the whole thing is worth looking at. It's all of it is beautiful. So yeah, Kirby, I can't say enough. But there's all these lore about Stan Lee, when he would tell other artists, like, this is how you draw them, and he would jump on a table and make the pose and all this. Is he inspiring Kirby? Or Kirby inspiring him, or were these two just on the same page about, like, you just got to have this constant feel of motion going on?
I think, and this is just my opinion, I would imagine that Stan had an idea of how dynamic that he wanted it to be, but maybe didn't have the words to describe it. But striking a pose or giving an example of how exaggerated things could be, almost maybe as a way of telling Jack, run with this, make it as over the top as you can, because the more wild and the more energetic you make it, the more these are going to sell, the more people are going to be loaning copies and borrowing copies and finally go out and buy their own. And I think in a big way, it's what explains, why the sales of the Marvel comics in that early era just skyrocketed.
And I don't think it took long for them to realize that either. I guess they were getting just crazy amounts of fan mail and all this. And did you know that, I'm sure you're aware of all these things, that I think they were limited to like 8 titles during that period when they first published Fantastic, 8 or 9 titles.
Yeah, I think the story goes, and I don't know the exact dates or figures, but not too long after they hit the ground running, they changed to distributors.
Right.
Well, the distributor was, I believe, owned by DC at the time.
My understanding, yeah.
And they said that we'll distribute your comics, but you're limited to basically 10 a month. And they took their top comics, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and continued to run them in their own series. But that's why there were so many double books back then. We've got Strange Tales that has Doctor Strange and Nick Fury. We've got what was the one? Tales to Astonish would have Ant-Man and the Hulk. The one, and of course there was the Captain America and Iron Man double feature. So that was ways of them to keep the characters alive and keep the movie moving forward, but have fewer actual books per month coming out so that they could stay under that limit.
Are you saying like they would have these two characters in a single issue?
Mm-hmm.
I thought they traded places every month. I thought like one month you would have an Iron Man, and the next month you would have Captain America, and then to just rotate around that. So it was like a bi-monthly kind of a
They
thing?
may have done both,
Okay.
because those issues, those issues and those comics came out before, while I was still too young to buy. So I never got those new. But I do remember
and you never will,
really
because I looked
enjoying
at
them
some
when they
prices
were
recently.
well,
and
they were reprinted.
Oh, yeah,
One of the
right.
things that I loved was the reprints
Yeah.
in a comic called Marvel Double Feature.
Yeah.
And those were reprints of the old Strange Tales that had Captain America and Iron Man in them. And of course, as a kid, I didn't realize that those stories were already 10 years old. I just thought it was another Iron Man comic, so I was happy to pick them up. Didn't even realize they were reprints.
Well, actually, Scott and we just took a break, and we were just saying that, yeah, we're not the historians of Marvel comics here, are we?
No,
yeah.
No. This is a collection of recollections and impressions and opinions.
And having very little knowledge doesn't stop me from having an opinion about things, right?
Agreed.
Yeah. Because I will change my mind on things. I mean, just an off topic here, but I guess I was reading a little bit about the Jack Kirby Stan Lee relationship, and there are some very strong opinions about, just was Jack Kirby ripped off and not given his full, measure of his work, and Stan Lee kind of was just standing on his, like, taking advantage of him and so on and so forth. And I'm of the opinion, like, I still have a really positive view of both of the guys, and that relationship actually kind of makes sense to me. I can see where Kirby's coming from, but I also see where Stan's coming from, and I'm not opinionated about it right now, but maybe in 2 or 3 episodes down the road, I'll be saying different.
Yeah, and it's difficult to know. And at this point, we'll never probably know the full, honest to gosh, deep down in their hearts truth, because even over the course of their lifespans, they both gave kind of contradictory stories. Even, Jack and Stan would contradict themselves decades later.
Yeah.
And I think depending on context, and I don't know if that's as time went on, they tended to look at what they did a bit differently and saw their collaboration differently. But yeah, it's there are hardcore people that say, Stan is the man, and this all came out of him, the father of Marvel Comics. And others say Stan would throw an idea out and give Jack Kirby a name and a rough outline and say, just get the issue done and turn it into me when it's ready.
Yeah. I think the reason why I'm so forgiving of that method or that approach is because I just think of Stan Lee as being the carnival barker, and he's getting everybody to go in and see the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care how talented you are, you kind of need that in order to get people to come in and see your work. And Stan was great at that. And how do I know that? Because I actually think that Stan Lee had a lot to do with why I read Marvel Comics. I loved immediately right off the bat the first comics. Matter of fact, I have a show and tell. The first comics that I bought, and I'm reading them, I loved that it was clear that there were fans, right? There were these, what do they even call themselves? Like there was an MMMS or something like that.
The Merry Marvel Marching Society.
Exactly. And then there was the bullpen, which I believed for a while. I actually thought they were all sitting around having a great time. And there was just this whole culture, and it was some pretty awesome things. And everything was so exciting. I mean, he did a great job.
Yeah.
I don't think if I had just opened up a comic and seen Kirby's work, that would have been enough necessarily to just really pull me in. Now, once you get into it, it helps tremendously. But does that make sense?
Oh yeah, he was definitely building a mythos. and almost something that you could that I compare it to is the Steve Jobs Steve Wozniak
Right.
collaboration of Apple Computer.
Yeah.
Woz had all the technical experience and knew how to build these things, but it wouldn't have done any good without a man like Steve Jobs who says, I've got to convince people that this is absolutely the greatest thing they've ever seen, and be the salesman and get people excited about this. And the two working together, one's, one's got the flash and one's got the technical expertise, and the two come together and it just explodes.
That's a really good analogy. I agree. I'm just jumping all over the place. I'm looking at my notes, just thinking about the Silver Age. Like some of the things that I was thinking also defines. Oh, did we already say what the year it was that one kind of wants to cover? 1961 to 1970 is sort of the range. Everybody, that seems to be the accepted range.
Right? That's always been the general range that I've considered.
And I guess my take on like why that may have been, and this, I'm sort of interested in what other people think or what you think. I don't know a whole lot about the Comic Code Authority. It just was there. I just accepted it, and only now am I reading a little bit about it. But it seemed like in 1970, 71, something like that, they had a little bit of they eased off a little bit of some of the stipulations that they had. Do you want to tell me what you think the Comic Code Authority was, and kind of what they did like during the Silver Age?
Well, prior to the Silver Age, a lot of the publishers were interested in crime stories, and there was a lot of what would be at the time considered violence and suggestive scenes and that sort of thing.
As a matter of fact, there was a nation hysteria about this, actually.
There was.
Yeah.
And that's pretty well documented. Although, albeit from the hysteria side in the book Seduction of the Innocent, and the author's name escapes me at the time.
Yeah, me
but
too,
there was it's the comic book's equivalent of Reefer Madness.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Comics Code Authority came along to clean this up, because there was, comics were causing juvenile delinquency, comics were causing crime, comics, anything that could be blamed other than society itself. And it's always been my understanding that the creation of the Comics Code Authority is kind of what sparked the resurgence in superheroes, because the publishers wanted to move away from those topics.
They almost had to move away from those topics. Yeah.
And so what can we do? Well, Superman has never run afoul of the Comics Code Authority, so let's do more superheroes. And we'll make it more clean cut and more family friendly. And because that is what kind of led to the resurgence of superheroes overall, and by that extension is the Silver Age, the start of the Silver Age.
Right, and this wasn't a government entity either. This was an independent authority, and that the comic book people just, if they wanted that code on it, which they did, then they would simply follow the rules. Is that
yes?
Yeah, is that fair to say?
Yes.
That?
And I was always under the impression that it was entirely voluntary.
It is, yeah.
But you didn't want to. I'm sure that they didn't want to be the only one left out.
So I just think that's a really interesting history. And so it was really just that simple. And also there was a lot of am I wrong the first time around? There's a lot of like anti-monster related things. Like they were kind of attacking the suspense, the eerie stories, the scary, the horror, and all this kind of stuff. Am I wrong about that?
Or is this I don't believe so. I don't know much about that specifically. Although I do know that monsters like vampires and that sort of thing were kind of falling out of favor.
Well, I think they were sometimes literally not allowed to use words like vampire. They certainly couldn't say zombie, and I think in certain ways they couldn't show werewolves and whatnot. And that's kind of like what ended the Silver Age and brought in the Bronze Age to some degree, is they lessened that. And of course, during the 70s, there was this huge, like, everybody was into monsters and horror.
Oh, yeah, literally. Frankenstein's monster had his own comic, Werewolf by Night, variations of that, like the Man-Wolf in the Spider-Man comics.
And in just culture, like everything was monsters. Like my dad he liked model cars, and there were all these like monster model cars. I remember, like, oh my gosh, like how did you infuse that? And then there's TV shows, The Munsters, and
yes,
The Exorcist would come out, and so forth. It was just everywhere at the time. I do want to get into the Bronze Age, but some of the things in my notes I think are really worth talking about because they're fond memories to me, or maybe not fond memories. That's because I wasn't born yet. But right away, they had this interconnected universe. That was something else I would say started off the. It was a definition. What am I trying to say? It's a characteristic, in my opinion, of like the Silver Age, where they start having not interconnected universe, but rather individuals are in one universe and they're crossing each other. Right? You already mentioned they had actual crossovers.
Yes, all these characters in Marvel, they're all based in New York City.
Yeah,
and
I would not want to live in New York City.
If Spider-Man's swinging down the street, he may very well see the Fantastic Car going a few blocks down. So eventually, they're going to bump heads, for better or for worse.
And they would, like, yes. Spider-Man would run into Johnny Storm, for instance.
Well, and in issue Spider-Man #1, he goes and tries to join the Fantastic Four because he thinks they get paid.
Oh,
yeah.
I read that. How did I not know that?
He's looking to make a few bucks off of Spider-Man.
Yeah. I did not. I totally forgot that had happened. I only vaguely remember. I'm going to have to go read that later tonight. Yeah, and to me that was just and that stays, right? And that's a huge part of it. And that was one of the first things that jumped out at me as a kid, that I immediately realized, like, oh, this is like it's like all like a soap opera, but all the soap operas on TV are connected. Mm-hmm. And it had this like a myth. Well, people compare it to it's the American mythology, and it felt that way.
Well, and I think even back then, it was a bit of a shrewd marketing ploy.
Yeah.
Because if you wanted to introduce a new character, having them pop up in an issue of an established, and of course by established at this point we mean maybe has 7 or 8 or 9 issues. If you want to push Spider-Man's new comic, put the Fantastic Four in it, because all the Fantastic Four fans are going to come pick that up out of curiosity or out of interest, and then you may hook a new reader.
Matter of fact, is there a word for this? As you're reading along, there will be a reference to either a period before, something that happened before, or in another comic. And Stan Lee is usually the person that jumps in. It's like as happened last-ish, or happening now in Fantastic Four number 176.
Oh, I remember all of those.
Yeah,
and I've never heard them referred to collectively as by name, but they were always there.
Yeah.
And if there was something going on or had happened recently, that was always a way to say, well, you better run out and pick up this copy of Daredevil if you want to know what happened to Spider-Man in it. And it worked.
It did work.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the major ways I would get hooked onto another story. It wouldn't necessarily be I wasn't necessarily perusing the little turn station or whatever. It was that there would be a connection, and I just would want to know what it was, and I would buy that.
Mm-hmm.
And some other things about this applies to the Bronze Age as well, because all this carries over. But another thing that I believe we've touched upon is that it's not just the superheroes are nuanced. It's also our villains are nuanced, right? Like, it's not that you feel empathy for the villains per se. They always lose eventually, but they're not killed off for the most part. And also, you kind of understand where they're coming from sometimes. Like, they will tell the story. You kind of get where Doctor Doom's coming from.
Yeah.
Then you have individuals like Namor. I always, as a kid, I said the Submariner is what I called him. The Submariner. Like, was he a good guy? Was he a bad guy? You just didn't know. You know, it would go back and forth.
He was a wild card.
He was a wild card.
He could fill either role as the plot needed.
Yeah. And he could be, at times, it was simultaneous.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you would want to see him be victorious, but that would mean the defeat of the Fantastic Four or something,
Yeah. Interestingly, I was always annoyed by Namor.
Oh, really?
Because his stubbornness and his arrogant, and his absolute lack of consideration of anything beyond his needs and his desires at the time got really old.
I feel a little ashamed that I like him.
Well, I felt like you could never trust him.
No.
Because he was just going to go whichever way the wind blew. And the aggressiveness that he brought made him a good villain, but I never developed any kind of attachment to him of this. And, because he would go on to star in his own comics as kind of a bit of an anti-hero, but I never really cared for that.
I did. Yeah, you're going to have to make me explore as to why, because I don't like people that like that in real life. So why do I like this character? I don't know, but I have very fond memories of. I liked his title, his what am I trying to say here?
His independent.
Well, his title, his issues, the issues.
The Savage Submariner.
Yeah, that's all I'm trying to say. That's all I'm trying to get at. Yeah, pretty cool. So yeah, and I think he's the first anti-hero of. Is he the first anti-hero in Marvel Comics, in your opinion?
He might be.
I can't think of another one.
In that era.
In that era, right? Because what are the ones, by the way, that came out in the Silver Age? You had Fantastic Four, immediately followed by who? Ant-Man, I believe, and Thor. Who comes out at this time? The early years, it was quite a few. The Avengers.
Honestly, within about the first 2.5 to 3 years, almost all the major characters that we know of today have been established. Iron Man, Daredevil, Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers.
It's crazy.
The way that they once they got the formula, they started knocking it out as fast as they could to capitalize on it.
Yeah, it was just crazy, the great characters that they had right off the bat. Of course, I'm really quite critical of the whole Ant-Man thing, though. I find that those comics are really difficult to read, the early ones. Did you enjoy them, or?
I'd never really read them. As a character growing up, I wasn't familiar with Ant-Man before or outside of the Avengers. If Ant-Man was in this particular issue of the Avengers or with the Wasp, that was the limit of my experience.
Up to this point, even?
Yeah, because I've never gone back and reread all of those original.
That's interesting because, I have the worst memory, and I've read a lot of the old issues now. But I think because I didn't have someone to talk to, like information just be dumped out of my head. Like my brain's like, you know what? You're never using this, and it gets dropped. We'll see if this podcast helped that at all, and just knowing you. But I have been reading them because I have I've been subscribing to that Marvel Unlimited, and that's kind of like the first thing I did was I jumped way back. Yesterday you mentioned like talking. You recently got a subscription.
Just recently,
and what was that? What was the stuff you started reading?
The first thing I gravitated to was the old monster comics.
That's what I did. I did that too, and so that brought me to Ant-Man because he was kind of written into all that, and they pushed him forward and made him into a. But if I don't remember who the writer is, but it's got to be Larry Lieber. I bet you anything it's Stan's cousin or brother or whoever this guy was. But the stories are hard to read. I want you to read them and tell me what you think about it.
I will. I will. One of the things that, engaging in this podcast has kind of rekindled a lot of my curiosity about some of the older comics, and the easy ability to read the vast majority of them online has gotten me excited to go back and revisit some of these.
Yeah, I own no stock in Marvel Unlimited, but if you have an iPad, I think I love it. The phone's okay. Computer, I don't enjoy it on the computer at all.
The computer interface is a bit difficult to navigate, at least up until you find what you're looking for. Opening it up on a full screen and just arrow keying through the pages is pretty relaxing. The trouble I have is finding things. The search, the search mechanism, unfortunately, is well documented as being horrible.
Yeah, I'm used to it now, so I don't think much. But if you ask me to find an issue right now, I would struggle. It takes too long. But I enjoy it so much. I don't even think negatively of it. So, and I've had it on and off for years. It's nice. But yeah, you get excited and you can just tear through all these issues. It's really great.
Well, and there's a lot of them that I've read and I'm sure I've forgotten. And there's a lot that I never read at all that I'm looking forward to experiencing for the first time. Amazingly enough, that the comics that were published in the early 60s, I'm going to read for the first time and maybe help put some things in perspective.
It will. Yeah, you're going to start. I'm interested in seeing what you have to, what gaps start getting closed in for you. That will be kind of cool. And we haven't talked much about the Bronze Age. In some ways, there's a lot of similarities, but in my opinion, so what years do the Bronze Age is covered? What years do you think they're covered for you?
Bronze Age, very early 70s, 70s, 71, kind of with a change from the old guard at Marvel, and also a change in the overall feel of the stories that were being told. I have a difficult time pinning it down to a specific date.
Well, there isn't
or
one,
a specific,
right?
or even a specific event in the comics.
That's why I asked you what it was for you.
Yeah,
but I see what you're saying. Yeah, even you can't come up with one for yourself.
If you forced me to circle a date on the calendar, for me, I would kind of say that the Bronze Age starts with the non-code drug issues of Amazing Spider-Man.
I think that's fair.
And because it wasn't shortly thereafter that Gwen Stacy died, probably less than a year as far as the comics went, and a lot of people pin that.
I could see why someone would do that, and that makes sense to me. And you're also right to say you can't really pin it down because Ditko leaves, I think, in 66, something really early, and then Kirby leaves what year? Maybe 1970 or something like that.
It could be he did defect to DC after a while.
Yeah. And of course, Stan sticks around. But we have all these newcomers that really do a good job. They're picking up the mantle here. This is when you start talking about Romita, for instance. And then I don't know when John, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I know I pronounce it wrong. I've always said Buscema, but it's Buscemi maybe, or something like that.
Honestly, I don't know.
Oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed.
I've always pronounced it Buscema, but that is probably a terrible.
I don't know. I guess I can't remember. My apologies, because he's one of my favorite all-time artists. You know what? People accuse him of just being a copy of Jack Kirby, and I see what they're talking about, and I believe with all my heart that somebody told him to draw like Kirby, and he did because he was told to. But man, do you really feel that way? Because it doesn't feel very Kirby to me. It feels very his own.
I don't, only in the sense that it's usually pretty easy for me to tell Kirby's work from Buscema's work.
That's what I think. It jumps right off the page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course a lot of that could be influenced by the inker, but to me, I would not ever have considered him a copy of Kirby.
I think I was just watching a bit of a video somewhere, and YouTube obviously, and they were able to compare, and I could see how similar it was in some cases, but I just never, growing up, thought those two were. It never occurred to me, and when you look at he's famous for doing Conan, and I think that's what I fell in love with Conan. I don't know if I ever told you that, but I'm kind of a Conan fan.
No.
I have way too many of the novels.
Yeah.
I'm collecting them. I don't like to buy them in mass on eBay or anything. I like to find them, but so it's slowed down because bookstores just don't have them like they used to. But I have a nice collection of Conan books, and they're generally pretty bad, but they're a lot of fun to read. But anyway, I fell in love with Conan solely because of the comic books.
I read the Conan comics late, probably what can be considered the very late stage Bronze Age. I never read a single novel. Had no other perspective other than what I was reading in the comics.
We'll talk. there's pros.
I
and
sense
cons.
a reading list in my future.
No. You can totally live your whole life without reading the. Are they called pastiches? Is that how you pronounce it? A pastiche, there are these authors that try to imitate Howard, the original author. Some of those are really excellent, and some of those are just absolutely god awful. Howard himself, though, I believe that's his name, was all the books are great. Those are beautiful books. Anyway, we're talking about Marvel comics. Yeah, and so anyway, he was such an individual artist. It just looks so unique, and I don't compare him to anyone else. He just seems so his own man, and I appreciate that. Of course, I also love his brother, Sal. I don't know if anyone else, you do.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
So many of my favorite comics, especially in the late Bronze Age, were done by him.
Yeah.
And he always had a very distinct, very unique style that I liked. His books didn't look like anybody else's.
No.
And nobody really had his style either.
Yeah.
And I always really enjoyed it. It was very dynamic, but it was also very clean and had just the right amount of detail.
Yeah, exactly. And the story just would flow really nicely. He seemed like he worked with another author. I'm going to embarrass myself by, I never noticed. It seemed like he worked a lot with this one guy. Maybe the last name is spelled something like Malto.
Bill Mantlo.
Okay.
Who was probably most well known for writing some of the tie-in comics, like the Micronauts and Rom.
Well, that's specifically what I'm thinking.
Yes.
It's like somebody said, "Hey, you do toys," and he did.
Well, he surpassed, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of those storylines rival anything that was done with any of the main characters in the entire Marvel pantheon.
Yeah, and I told you, like, did you buy the toys? Did you have
I did.
Yeah.
I did. When I was a kid, I had a handful of Micronauts toys, and one day I was just walking through the dime store and looked at the spinner rack and saw Micronauts #2 and thought, "Oh, I've got to have that." In fact, the Micronauts comic is kind of what sparked my second age of being a comic reader and collector, because I told myself, well, I'm going to read these Micronauts toys or comics because I really love the toys. But while I'm here, I wonder what Spider-Man's up to. Oh, look, there's the new Iron Man. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the snowball was rolling, and
what year is
stopping it?
What year would this be? Around
79-ish.
Yeah, so that's when I was
78, 79.
Yeah, I started right in 1980. Yeah, and I did not buy the toys. I don't know why. I just was never interested in them. But I loved the stories. I loved the Micronauts. They stood on their own. Mm-hmm. I thought they were just exciting. And then I loved the Rom story. I love his backstory. I love the whole thing.
I did too.
Yeah, and you told me just yesterday what publication is coming out or has come out?
The anthology collections are going to come out now in paperback with a much more affordable price point. I would have loved to have had the hardback editions, but they were just a little pricey for me. But I plan on picking up the paperbacks.
Yeah, I'm going to be so jealous. I would get Rom personally, and I think you would go Micronauts, wouldn't you?
I may get both.
Okay.
The one thing for the Micronauts is, of the very limited number of issues of my collection that I kept, the Micronauts are among those. Oh. I enjoyed them so much, but I did get rid of all my ROMs. So having those in a bound volume, and unfortunately, neither of those titles are on Marvel Unlimited.
No, they're not.
So
that's right.
If I want to go back and reread them, I either have to go start buying back issues or just buy a collected volume, which, pricey though it may be, in the long run still probably costs less.
Yeah.
And
you're not going to be seeing them in the movies or anything anytime soon, are we? So
I don't think so, and mostly because the rights have just been tied
Exactly.
up for so long.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a shame, and like you said, it's not on. You can't read these. Apparently, there's dark alley back ways that you can find these comics online, but I haven't found them.
As with most things,
Yeah,
if you dig deep enough.
I haven't tried. I haven't dug deep enough, but
Well, since we've gotten off on a bit of a tangent, maybe what we'll do is put a pin in it for now. We'll consider this an intro with our Silver Age, what the Silver Age means to us. And in the next issue, the next episode, we will look at
I want to say that too.
look more closely at the Bronze Age and what that means to us, and what characters and stories that we left the biggest impressions from that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, because actually it was just sheer hubris that I thought that we could talk about these two ages in one sitting, you know? So,
well, once we get rolling and once you get the tangents going, and it's a big sprawling mess.
well, indeed. And, you know, actually, and thanks so much, because I have been, Scott knows this, that I've just been waiting for you for decades. The guy I can sit down and talk comics with, because the few times it's happened in the past in my life, you would, I don't know, you would, some of these guys, they'll just kind of talk down to you because I'm just such a noob, right? And about the whole thing, I can only get into it so deep, and you've just been a joy to like meet and just chat about this in a pretty casual way. I appreciate it a lot. So it's been a lot of fun for me.
I'm enjoying it myself.
Yeah.
It's nice to revisit some of this. It's been a long time since I've spent much time thinking about comics, and it's kind of reinvigorating me a little bit. Making me want to go back and revisit some of those old stories.
And it's easy to do. It's not too expensive, because that's what held me back in the day. Like, even now, like I don't have the money, you know, to buy a single issue. Like, I just wanted to, I'm more interested in not even owning. I'm interested. I like the history, as if it was real. I almost want to become a historian of Marvel Comics. In a way, you know what I mean.
I do.
Yeah. Hey, you want, because I said earlier I had show and tell, and I didn't do it. I did bring these are my first two comics that I ever bought that got me into the whole thing. My supervillain team up, number 17, and the Marvel 2-in-1 thing, and Stingray, number 64. So I bought those solely because I was trying to learn how to do action. I was just trying to do human figures, I should say. And I'd gone to the library, and the only books they had like nude images in them, and there was no way I was taking that home to my family. And if someone caught me, they would not believe I was just interested in drawing the human figure. So I'm like, superheroes, I'll go get a couple of the books. And I didn't pick them for their subject. I picked them because they had images inside of them that I thought I could use. And then I read them and got turned on to the whole thing.
I had a smattering of the Marvel 2-in-1. I don't know if I had this one specifically, but I remember the supervillain team up, number 17, very clearly. I had this one as well. It may have just been an impulse buy.
It's a great cover.
One week I went to the store and there weren't enough other comics that I needed, and this one has always stuck in my head, because the line that they draw, that the hate monger is actually Adolf Hitler.
Yes. It blew me away.
And that was the last issue of the series.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay. Because I don't have any more.
And he ends up trapped in a fake cosmic cube by the Red Skull.
I thought was awesome. The whole thing was awesome. It just, it was really great. And then it came from the perspective of the bad guys. And, they introduced to me. AIM was in there. I mean, it's all in there. It's really great. Yeah. Well, fun. Okay, well...
that one definitely brings back some memories.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, that's a wrap for this episode of Silver to Bronze, and see you next time, true believers.
See you next time.
I worked on that. Okay, talk to you later.